After watching Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, the documentary, I probably will never watch Nickelodeon or a lot of these shows ever again. As a child, Nickelodeon and Disney Channel just felt like a child's dream, like it's something that you always wanted to do. I couldn't wait to be on there when I was older. So to find out that these kids went through so much hell at 10, 11, and 12 years old, on set and off set, is so crazy to me. It's so heartbreaking. And these adults that were around are just as bad as the predators and pedophiles that were actually doing the stuff because you didn't say nothing. Quiet on Set is a 4-part documentary, so every episode is about 42 minutes. So the first part is about Dan Schneider and who he is. He's from Memphis, and nobody thought he was going to be successful as he was, but he's basically why Nickelodeon is what Nickelodeon is today. He's responsible for hit shows like All That, The Amanda Show, What I Like About You, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Zoe 101, Sam and Cat, Victorious. The resume is resume. But you want to know what else is resume? The amount of kids that he has verbally and emotionally assaulted over the years. So they go through different actors who was on All That, which was his first big show, and they talk about their experience on the show. Leon Frierson said on All That, a lot of his characters wore leotards, and as a child, he felt very uncomfortable and very exposed. One of the sketches on All That required him to wear a prosthetic nose, and his character was called Noseboy. But he said on top of wearing the prosthetic nose, they also put it on his costume on his shoulders, and it looked like a penis and balls. And then in one of the scenes, he sneezes, and it lands on a lady's face, and it's similar to a cum shot. So as a child acting this out, or even me looking at it, because I remember watching this episode, it never dawned on me that that's what it was. But as an adult, it's like, why is this on children's programming? And everybody involved who was an adult should be ashamed of themselves because y'all knew exactly what this was and y'all let it go down. But apparently this is how Dan always wrote. And nobody ever wanted to say anything about Dan's writing or what he did because they wanted to be on his good side. Another person who spoke up was Katrina, and basically she was being body shamed for gaining weight, which is crazy because how are you supposed to stop gaining weight when you were a child? You're supposed to press pause? It's impossible. They told her it was already one big person on the show, so she can't be another big person, and that's crazy to tell a child. She was also told a lot of broken promises by Dan, like she was going to get her own show, but then eventually she kept getting older and looking more mature, so she went off to college, and somebody else came through and took over. They discovered Amanda Bynes at 10. She was doing comedy at the Laugh Factory, and she was amazing to be a 10-year-old. Hilarious. So usually as a female in the industry, you have to be either super shy or you have to be overly sexualized, but Amanda was a rare deviant, and that's why she got scooped up like Baskin Robbins by Dan. Grabbing Amanda and making the Amanda Show was his biggest move yet. So female writers were brought in to help with the Amanda Show, and at that time in 1999, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for women in that field. Dan knew that, so he took advantage of Jenny and Christy and made them share a salary that's usually for one person. Jenny and Christy both took the offer, saying that they really wanted this opportunity so bad, but they said it started off well working at Paramount Studios, but then the writing was always weird. Penelope Taint was one of the characters created by Dan on the Amanda Show, and what people don't know is the taint really stood for what we call now the gooch. The area right between the balls and the anus, and basically that's what the taint stood for on a kid show. The girls said when Dan was asked about it, he denied all allegations, but they knew what it really was. They said it was always nasty jokes and hidden messages in all his shows, and even at the workplace it was pranks all the time. One of the pranks that they described really disturbed me. So they were in the writing room talking about high school, and Dan asked Christy to lean on the table and act like she was being sodomized and tell her idea, which is weird. And the sad part is she really did it because she felt like she had to stay on his good side. But they allowed a lot of things to keep their job with Dan. Like Dan would show pornography on the screen and ask for a massage and say, if you give me a massage, then I'll put your sketch in the show. But as time went on, Jenny, the woman right here, found out that her and Christy splitting the salary was not ethical, which you should have knew in the beginning. She called the Writers Guild to make sure that she wasn't wrong, and then they called Dan and made him pay them correctly. But then it just went downhill for both of them after that. Dan had called Jenny and threatened her, basically saying if he found out that she's the one who made the call to Writers Guild, she would be blackballed from Viacom and Nickelodeon forever. And then Dan didn't want nobody to have no free time, so he wanted them to work on clock and off the clock. On the last week of filming the Amanda Show, it was 3 days left. Christy got fired because she went to a concert and a hangout with her friends, and Dan did not like that. First of all, how are you going to fire me and this is my free time? I'm not even on the clock. And then Jenny stayed for season 2. They offered her 27 weeks of work, but was only going to pay her for 16, but they still wanted her to work 11 weeks for free. That's crazy. Working 11 weeks for free is crazy, especially when you're offering men full salaries who it's their first time. Jenny still took the deal, which was crazy, but she only lasted 4 days because he tried to embarrass her in a meeting with a bunch of men. He brought Jenny into a room with all men to present her idea. She presented her idea, and then he asked her, didn't you used to do phone sex? And she was so embarrassed and ran out. So Jenny was gone, Christy was gone, and Jenny called Christy and wanted to sue Dan for gender discrimination, and she did. It was also for hostile work environment and harassment, and she actually won, but she knew this was the end of her career. She was hoping this would put an end to Dan's reign, but it did not do nothing. Like I said earlier, Amanda Bynes was Dan's golden ticket. She was his favorite and everybody knew. The kids were a little envious and jealous, and I can understand why. She just came and took y'all jobs. She got her own show and everything. Raquel Ballou was on the Amanda Show at 12, and she was really excited to be there. Her and Drake knew that Amanda was the star and they were the co-stars. But Raquel said that Dan favored Drake and Amanda more than her. For Raquel's 13th birthday, she had got this big cake, and he didn't want her cake to be as big as it was. Her mother said she seen what was happening, but she didn't want to say nothing because she didn't want her daughter to receive backlash. But what kind of mama is you? Your daughter is basically going through racial discrimination at 13, and you're quiet? All right, Maya Angelou. But Dan was obsessed with Amanda, and it was very creepy. He would disappear with her at times. He would be in a hot tub with her with full clothes on. She got on a bikini, and she like 12, 13. I want to know what sane person sits in a hot tub with full clothes on. He's a maniac. But Dan loved him some Amanda, so he wanted to follow her into mainstream success, so he made shows like What I Like About You and Big Fat Liar. Dan got kicked off of What I Like About You because he could not get along with Will Cajon from Friends. But Dan was still able to be around as a producer, just not as a writer. For some reason, Dan felt the need that he needed to usher Amanda into adulthood, but at the time, Amanda was getting into it with her parents also. Amanda ended up running away from home, and she wanted to be emancipated, and Dan helped her the whole way. A lot of teen stars do this, but I feel like Dan inserted himself into family business was very weird because it has nothing to do with you, big boy. But the plan actually did not work. He went to court and they did not win, so then he had to go right back to Nickelodeon and leave Amanda alone. Nickelodeon accepted Dan with open arms because he had success with all that in the Amanda show, so he made all that again with a whole new cast. And this cast was talented. Giovanni Samuels, Kyle Sullivan, Brian Christopher Hearn, like it was some good people on here. All three of them said they were working longer hours than usual, longer than the child labor laws allowed, and then they were also doing skits that made them feel very uncomfortable. One of the shows they all hated was On Air Dare, and they all were confused on why they were trying to make a kid's fear factor. Like, why is Brian Christopher Hearn covered in peanut butter being licked up like a dog? It was given Freaky Frog Fantasy by Dan. But Brian talked about his experiences on the show, and they were very racist. In one of the skits on the show, he was called Lil Fetus, and he was supposed to be the youngest rapper ever. They had him in another bodysuit, and I told y'all about bodysuits earlier, but the problem is that they said that the skin color that he was supposed to be was charcoal. Now, y'all tell me where y'all see any type of charcoal, because charcoal is super dark, so that's racist. Even his other roles and skits were weird. He was basically a dope dealer selling cookies. And I respect Brian's mom because she always felt the climate and she always said something about it, and they were upset about her always talking. She would tell her agent that this activity was weird, and the agent would be like, just be quiet, please, because you're going to mess up your son's opportunities, which is crazy. Dan treated Brian with caution because of his mom, but eventually it got him fired, and he was so mad at his mom for it. It ruined their relationship, but he understands now that she was only trying to protect him, and I'm happy that she did. Dan had people on their toes 24/7 and had people like Karen getting sick trying to make sure his work was done on time. He had so much power that everybody was disposable, so he got rid of Karen, got rid of Virgil, it didn't matter who you was. Dan got rid of Virgil and got somebody named Jason Handy to be the new production assistant to make sure the kids are okay, walk them around outside and on set. He had wrote in Giovanni's yearbook, "You and the kids are the reason I work for free. I love y'all." Come to find out, Mr. Handy was too hands-on. He got sued for childhood pornography. He had over 10,000 images of children and then 1,768 pictures of young girls. He made a Ziploc bag with a girl's name on it who was 7 years old with a pair of underwear in it. Weirdo. He even had a journal that said, "I'm a full-grown pedophile and I have been giving into my desires for little girls for the past couple of weeks." He even wrote, "I struggle every day to find a victim that I can take advantage of." Like, who hired this man? The girl Brandy went to court and testified against him, and he went to jail for 6 years, but everything was swept under the rug like nothing ever happened. But once Jason was arrested, somebody else was hired who was another pedophile, Brian Peck. Brian Peck was the reoccurring pickle boy on all that, but he also was in other things like Good Burger. All the kids really loved Brian. They used to go to his house for barbecues and everything. At his house, Brian had one room full of vintage paintings, and one of the pictures was a clown with a bunch of balloons. Kyle Sullivan asked Brian about the picture and what it meant, and Brian turned the picture over and they seen that it was a gift from John Wayne Gacy. John is a serial killer who has killed young men and young boys. And Brian was kind of proud of his relationship with John, saying that they talk all the time, they write each other like they pen pals, like, oh, that's the type of company that you like to keep around? Now, Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, Part 3 and 4 was the one that really had me in my feelings. The way that Drake mama pissed me off, what the hell were you doing that you were not paying attention to your son's whereabouts? Like, you should have left him with his daddy. Explain to me how it took your son's girlfriend's mom to realize that something is wrong with the company that's around your son and you couldn't tell. Where is your antennas? Where is your mother's instinct? Because you suck. This part pissed me off. If I could go back in time and find Drake's mama, we would be fighting right now. So part 3 starts with Drake admitting that he was the person that got sexually assaulted by Brian Peck. Nobody has ever known all this time. This is his first time publicly telling the story, attaching his name and face to it. So he starts telling the story on how it happened. So Dirty Dan Snyder's next big show was Drake and Josh. Drake started acting at 5 years old. He made cameos on Home Improvement, Seinfeld, and Jerry Maguire with Tom Cruise. He was naturally a star, just like Amanda Bynes, so that's why Dan Snyder picked him up and put him on The Amanda Show, which was genius. Amanda wanted Drake on her show, and it was a hit. Totally Kyle was something that I really loved. I look forward to it every week. And everything was cool until they got to Nickelodeon on Sunset for the second season of The Amanda Show. Drake described him as a walking history book. He knew so much, and Drake wanted to learn so much, so he always wanted to be around him. Acting lessons were always at Brian Peck's house, but Drake's dad was always right there because he knew Brian Peck was a woodpecker. Brian had a house that was kind of like a kid's dream. Like, everything was so cool on the wall, kind of like a candy store, like Disneyland. Like, it was so appealing. But Drake's dad was not having it. He said Brian was around Drake too much. He would be in the fitting room trying to help him with his clothes, putting his arm around his waist, like, get away from my son. Drake's dad said he seen a video of Brian Peck doing that to Leonardo DiCaprio too, and he didn't like that either. So he told production. This part pissed me off. Production gonna tell Drake's dad maybe it's because you're homophobic and Brian is gay that you don't like him around your son. What? I don't care if that man was straight, bi, gay, cheetah, leopard, zebra, elephant. I don't want him touching my son inappropriately. Get his hands off of my son. When I say this part irritated me, just because it's normal activity for Brian the woodpecker does not mean that it's normal. So while all this is going on, life is still happening. So Drake is still filming the Amanda Show, and it's a scene where him and Josh are fighting over a piece of shrimp. Everybody on set finds it hilarious, and that is how Drake and Josh is made. So at this point, Drake is getting his own show, and his dad is his manager, but Brian wants to be his manager and is trying to get his dad up out of there. Brian had a whole mastermind plan set up, and his dad seen it from the beginning. His dad threw Drake a concert, and Brian came to the concert with his people and followed Drake the whole time like he was Martin Luther King. Then it was time for Drake's 15th birthday, and Brian wanted to throw it at his house. While at the party, Drake's dad seen cars that Brian and his friends that got him that was very inappropriate, so it had adult things on the cars that were not right for kids. So after the birthday party, Drake's dad started setting boundaries with Drake and Brian did not like that. Brian started lying, talking about Drake's dad is stealing money from him, and he gonna be a terrible manager and gonna ruin every opportunity, so he got Drake and his mom to turn against the dad. This part pissed me off because who made her the final say-so? Obviously, she ain't got no time. I haven't heard her in Drake's story yet. Have you been to an audition? Have you been on set? You just giving the rights over to somebody that you don't even know. The blame is all on the mama. This is your fault. You making decisions and you not even supervising your son. You could care less. Brian was playing chess, not checkers. He placed himself in every part of Drake's life to the point where Drake cannot escape this man. Whether it was auditions, concerts, or Disneyland, Brian was there. And one morning while Drake was sleeping on the couch, he woke up to being sexually assaulted by Brian. He was 15, shook, did not know how to react. Brian was apologetic, like, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, it'll never happen again. But Drake said it just got worse and worse. It was very abusive. Drake didn't even want to say what it was. He said, just imagine the worst possible thing that can be done to you. And I said, that's wild. All this is going on in the midst of Drake and Josh, which is crazy to me because you can't even tell that all this is going on. Drake ended up getting a girlfriend and used to stay at her house to escape Brian. Drake and Brian were supposed to go to Disneyland, but Drake did not want to go after what had happened. I'm not going to the happiest place in the world and I'm not happy. So Brian was blowing his phone up and Drake was ignoring every call. So then he started calling the house phone of the girlfriend. Blowing their house phone up. How crazy can you be at 40 years old? The girlfriend's mom answered the phone, gives the phone to Drake, and Drake said he does not want to go. He overbooked. He got something to do with the girlfriend, and he's not going to go. He hung up the phone, and Brian is upset. And instead of Brian going to live his 40-year-old life, he starts calling the house phone again, multiple times. So the girlfriend's mom, being a real mom, because I don't know what Drake's mom is doing, asked Drake what's going on. Drake said, oh, it's nothing. And the mama said, oh, no, ain't no 40-year-old calling a 15-year-old this many times. The girlfriend's mom takes Drake to a therapist to talk because at this point, Drake is terrified. He feels like if he says anything, his career is over because Brian has all the connections. So then it's time to reshoot the pilot of Drake and Josh. And why is Brian trying to be casted as the daddy on the show? As if you're not in this man's life enough, now you're trying to be a part of his show too? Get out of here. Drake had a conversation with his mom and just exploded and told her everything that's been going on. And now she want to call the police. And this is why I'm so mad at Drake's mama. You ruined the relationship between Drake and his father just for you to neglect Drake and then now look at his life. Then on top of that, when she called the police, she didn't even call the daddy. Why you ain't call the daddy? His dad found out once Brian was already convicted to go to jail, which is wild. The police come to the house and Drake has to convince Brian to admit what he did without Brian knowing that he's being recorded. Brian got arrested for lewd acts with a child, sodomy, forcible penetration, oral copulation, and some more stuff. People will call Drake like, did you hear what happened to Brian? And Drake will act like he did not know what's going on, which is crazy. The only person he told the truth to was Dan. Drake was stressed out to the point where he was losing his hair and getting scabs because of stress, and he still had to film for Drake and Josh. So it was time for the trial, and Drake did not want nobody to know that it was him, so he went under John Doe so nobody could know. In the courtroom, Drake said that Brian's whole side was filled up with support from Hollywood and other people. On Drake's side, it was him, his mama, and his brother. Seeing a man like Brian have all that support, knowing that he's guilty, and there's proof that he's guilty, is sad. And then he was charged with 11 counts, but then he only got charged for 2 counts and then got 16 months in jail. Only 16 months for sleeping with a minor is crazy to me. And then he had to register as a sex offender, but that's still not enough. And then Brian was super known in the industry, so he had support from some heavy hitters like James Morrison and Taron Killam, Alan Thicke, Thomas DeSanto, Ryder Strong, Ron Melendez, Beth Carroll, Kimmy Robertson, like Joanna Kearns. There was so many people, and it's so crazy to me that y'all did that. Some of them was blaming Drake, talk about this will never happen if he wasn't pushed and tempted. Like, are you serious? This man is 40. Even Beth Carroll said it would be a pleasure to still work with Brian after knowing what he did. And as a registered sex offender, Disney Channel allowed him to come to the Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and still work after what he just did to Drake Bell. I could never look at Disney the same. How dare y'all? Then they denied all claims, like y'all know exactly what y'all was doing. Dan Schneider and Nickelodeon did not write a letter of support for Brian. But Nickelodeon not off the hook because they hired a man called Ezel Channel and he brought a child to Nickelodeon Studios and abused him. Where are the background checks? Y'all just hiring anybody. Y'all might as well hire O.J. Simpson and El Chapo. So after the arrest of Ezel Channel and they got their background checks together, they started growing again. So they made Zoe 101, iCarly, Victorious, Sam and Cat. They were in their bag. Dan was responsible for all these shows in the 2000s, and it made him so powerful because nobody at Nickelodeon was doing this. And this is my personal opinion because Nickelodeon was eating, but Disney Channel was eating them up. They had That's So Raven, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Hannah Montana, Phil of the Future, Lizzie McGuire, and then they kept going. There was like The Replacements, American Dragon Jake Long, The Buzz on Maggie, Dave the Barbarian, Brandy and Mr. Whiskers. It just kept going on. But what made Dan so smart is that he was so in tune with the culture. He was so tech savvy, so all his shows had something to do with the internet. iCarly was like a parody of YouTube and like Skype, Oogle, video chat. Zoe 101 was like a parody of like Facebook and other stuff like that. Victorious was like a parody of iPhone with the Paraphone. Like it was genius. But Dan started doing BTS of these shows to try and show like an inside scoop, and it just showed how uncomfortable some of the cast would be. The way that all 4 of these shows were over-sexualized is disgusting. I can't believe I never noticed that when I was a child, but it's disgusting looking at it as an adult. And then it was so obvious and bold to be on kids programming. Ariana Grande rubbing that potato really threw me off. Sucking on the cow udders, then it was like the zucchini thing. It was just nasty. Everything was nasty. It was a Goo Pop episode where it was the same cum shot that was on all that back in the day. Like, you still haven't learned your lesson. He was doing all these freaky frog fantasies with these children, and that's so messed up. And my problem is all the costume people and the production people are trying to speak up now, but when it was happening, y'all said nothing. You can't put all the blame on Dan when there's so many adults watching this being filmed and helping this being filmed. Where are y'all at? So the outrage now from the people who worked on the production, I don't want to hear it. This is the same with R. Kelly. All these adults knew all this was going on and y'all said nothing. Now all of a sudden y'all want to go up. No. The blood is on y'all hands just as much as the people who did it. Then they said Dan was always getting a massage on set, like he had to be touched and caressed. Then they said he had a foot fetish and it always showed in his shows because somebody's toes was always showing. He was so powerful. He got the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Kids' Choice Awards, and everybody showed up on stage giving him his props. The only person that didn't show up was Jeanette McCurdy, and that caused speculation. In her book, I'm Glad My Mom Died, she talked about an anonymous creator who was very terrifying and mean-spirited. He would yell out things like sloppy and idiot, just like the girl said in the beginning in part 1. She said he would make somebody feel worthless and careless, and I feel like that's probably why she rushed back to work after her mom died of cancer, because she felt like he was going to fire her. They investigated Sam and Cat, and then Dan was no longer allowed to work with the cast hands-on. And this was forever, and all his new shows too. Dan didn't like that he couldn't be hands-on because that's the way that he loved to work. He loved to touch. The Me Too movement started in 2017. People started talking, and Dan got investigated again. And I'm like, damn, how many times this man got to be investigated? They dropped this man in 2018, and I'm like, finally, because that's his 3rd investigation. 3 strikes you're out. According to Dan, nothing in this documentary is true. But I know what is true. Being a childhood star is not easy. When they get spat out of the industry, they are not the same people. And I wonder why. It's examples of this. Y'all are traumatizing these kids, and I feel so bad. I can't watch none of these shows no more. I'm sorry. This whole thing broke my heart. I cried like 3 or 4 times because this is sad. Like, the whole thing is sad, and I want justice for everybody.